I have spent several months planning, grinding, and participating in events that have consistently ruined my sleep schedule, all to produce an item that represents the beginning of the end game. Today we're talking about the Terminator, a bow that not only has really good stats, but shoots 3 arrows instead of 1, and has a left-click ability that improves DPS even more. So, how can you get one? All you have to do is go mining or farming for 100 hours or so, head into the hub, and walk over this way to the auction house. So I guess that doesn't work for me. On to plan B. Looking at the Terminator recipe, it is pretty straightforward for most of the items, as they fit into the category of casual grind over time. All I need to do for these materials is either run minions or spend a few hours slowly building my stash until I have enough for the Terminator. Seems simple enough? Well, not really. The more unique items are the Griffin Feathers, which can only be acquired during Diana's mythological ritual event, and the Judgment Core, which has a 1 in 1,771 base drop chance from a tier 4 Voidgloom. The Terminator requires an enormous amount of resources, so why do I need it? Would a Juju make a good enough budget equivalent? Some players might argue yes, but that's probably because they're broke and don't have aspirations to stream M7 runs as their future career. Notwithstanding the social value of having the superior item, gearing up for Master Mode dungeons involves a degree of hypermaxing that I haven't seen in any other skill in the game. To put any Master Stars on a Juju would be a crime against Skyblock, so I hope you understand now why I need to craft the Terminator, despite the difficulty of doing so.
At this point, I should probably mention that I'm going for YouTube rank, and I've spent hundreds of hours on the content for this video, so if you were able to spare me 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button, it would bring me one step closer to my ultimate goal on Hypixel.
My mindset throughout this process was that I ignored pretty much every other resource and focused on what I needed to acquire to drop the Judgment Core. The only exception was when Diana was in office, because I needed to take advantage of the opportunity to grind for Griffin Feathers. In my opinion, the Judgment Core itself was more annoying to grind for than my Hyperion. I know some people will disagree, or call out the fact that I was RNG carried to hype in 353 runs, but you need to understand that I actually enjoy playing dungeons, so the time spent on throwing F7s was frustrating, but still a fun experience. Anyway, comment your thoughts on this so we can have a civilized discussion on which is the harder grind. I digress. Let's talk Judgment Core. We know that it drops rarely from a tier 4, so the next step was firstly learning to actually defeat the boss, then optimizing how fast I could do that, and then finally maxing my magic find. There are 2 main ways you can take on the Voidgloom Seraph, either with melee or right-click mage. The melee strategy involves the use of God Roll or Semi-God Roll Crimson, the Atom Split Katana, and a 1 build bank G-Drag or Ender Dragon Pet. Right-click mage can be done in Hypermaxed Aurora, a Hyperion, and a Sheep or, again, 1 build bank G-Drag. When I started this process, I had just acquired my Hyperion, and I was really excited to use it, so I figured I might as well work through the right-click mage setup. I also recognized that right-clicking the ground in the rough vicinity of the boss was going to be 100 times easier than trying to left-click the boss itself when doing melee attacks. The final reason was that I already had a Hype and a Sheep pet, so I thought that making the right-click mage setup would be easier. With the benefit of hindsight, I do not recommend this. I constantly struggled with my EHP, and as I'll explain pretty soon, I ended up having to invest more time and more energy into the right-click mage setup than I would have if I went down the melee path. So enough about my opinions, onto the actual setup. The first thing to do was to craft Final Destination. Now I did mention earlier that it's possible to kill the boss in Aurora. This is only really achievable with a hypermaxed God Roll set, ideally with Refrigerate for extreme defense buffs. This was not possible for me though, as I had barely thought about Kudra, and kind of wanted to save it until after getting the Terminator. Coming soon though, so make sure you're subscribed to keep up with my progress through that. To get Final Destination, I did a couple of tier 2s by myself, and had some kind viewers on my stream offer to carry me through some tier 4s to speed up the process. Not too long after, I ran through the Crystal Hollows to pick up the redstone and craft the armor set. I also crafted a Soulflow engine at this point to start accumulating Soulflow, which is a consumable resource I'll explain later, but it is crucial to the setup. Once I had Final Destination, I reforged the armor to 3/4 necrotic, putting Loving on the chestplate. I then ran a lot of dungeons for the 64 Wisdom books, 64 Rejuvenate books, 20 Fumings, and 4 Recombs. After that, I killed 25,000 Zealots to get the bonus defense up to a reasonable standard. I also did a little bit of farming for the Hot Potato books and called it a day on the armor set. Just kidding, that alone took me weeks. So after all that time and energy that I put into the armor set, I had a go at doing a boss. And it didn't go very well. A number of things went wrong. My DPS was too low, I ran out of mana basically immediately, and my EHP was absolutely awful. The first thing to fix was my EHP, because if I couldn't survive, I'd be unable to play through the boss's several phases. To do this, I equipped the Enderman pet and utilized its Endurian perk, which reduced my damage taken by up to 30% when I got it to level 100. This was incredibly helpful and gave me the opportunity to get through the boss's first damage phase, leading me to my next issue, mana regeneration. This was a lot more complicated than just equipping a different pet. The most impactful thing that I could do was to upgrade my mana flux to the overflux. Not only does this improve the mana regeneration bonus on the orb from 50% to 100%, but it also doubles the orb's useful time from 30 seconds to 60 seconds, meaning that I don't have to constantly replace it, which was draining my mana even further. The overflux crafting recipe requires an RNG drop from Wolfslayer, with a 1 in 2,465 chance. I was not excited for this, as embarking on trying to obtain a different Slayer drop felt like I was just getting distracted or kinda wasting my time. I've seen people do melee on tier 4 Voidglooms with no orb at all. At this point, right-click mage was looking like an even worse decision. Nonetheless, I committed to the path and pushed forward despite my poor decision making. And the RNG gods shined on me that day, because I got incredibly lucky and dropped the flux capacitor at only 190,000 total Sven XP. Not only this, but I got it off a loot share when trading spends with Zerelt. Loot share is pretty incredible because it divides the already crazy low odds of getting rare drops by 10, meaning that I had a 1 in 24,650 chance of getting this the way that I did. This one moment meant so much because it reignited my motivation to push forward with the right-click mage setup. I did a bit of mining for the gold and redstone and crafted the overflux on stream. One of my viewers jokingly commented, "Plasma flux when?" And that's when I made a short detour through 2 mining fiestas leading up to Scorpius. The overflux has one more upgrade tier above it, known as the plasma flux. This requires a key ingredient, the plasma nucleus, that is sold exclusively at the darker auction. Every 60 minutes, at 5 minutes to the hour, a dark auction occurs where players may competitively bid for rare and powerful items. Every 6 real-life months, Scorpius is elected as mayor, and he includes a few super rare and powerful items, one of which is the plasma nucleus. Seeing as Scorpius was relatively exclusive, I thought it would be a good idea to go for it. 9 darker auctions and 383 million coins later, I purchased the plasma nucleus, got the other resources, and upgraded my overflux to the plasma flux power orb. The stats on this are pretty good. From 100 to 125 bonus mana regen, slightly better healing, and slightly higher strength buff. But is it worth nearly 400 million coins? Not really. Kinda regret this. Could have spent my money a lot more efficiently. Welcome to economics class, because today we're learning about opportunity cost. This is the understanding of the cost of the next best alternative to the primary decision. The primary decision, in this case, is the plasma nucleus purchase for 383 million coins. So what's the opportunity cost? What I should have done is purchase the Ender artifact, which at the time I saw go for under 300 million coins in the darker auction. With the spare change, I could have put that into dungeon chests, bought something else, or even left it in the bank for the G-Drag. Upon testing the Plasma Flux Power Orb, I realized that it did help resolve a lot of my mana issues, but it still wasn't enough. I then did some spooky fishing to obtain soul fragments to craft the Soul Whip. I put Mana Seal 3 on the Soul Whip so that I could regen even more mana during the boss's laser phase. This, combined with the Plasma Flux, was enough to cope through. But coping in a tier 4 Voidgloom boss fight is not enough. One skill issue, one moment of server-side or client-side lag, and you die. So I got to work finding other ways to boost my total mana and mana regen. The first place that I turned was equipment. The Glowstone Gauntlet is relatively cheap to craft, so I spent a few hours mining glowstone in the Crimson Isles and attribute farmed a God Roll, Mana Pool, Mana Regen Glowstone Gauntlet all the way to tier 7. I could have kept going to tier 10 to max it out, but I didn't think it was worth it and had absolutely no energy to waste after spending 400 million coins on the Plasma Flux. I then had a look at accessories. The best one that I could find was the Blood Donor Artifact. Found in the Hemovibe Rift collection, this accessory gives a permanent 10% mana regen buff. That's the equivalent of a tier 10 mana regen attribute, but because it's an accessory, it applies regardless of the gear that I'm using. I saw this as a long-term investment in the profile, so I progressed through the final stage of the Rift to unlock Vampire Slayer, killed a bunch of thralls and fledglings until I had enough Hemovibe to transfer back to the overworld, and crafted my first vampire minion. The tier 1 minion also requires a Bat Person helmet, because why would anything in this process be easy? So I called up the Fearmongerer, smashed a bunch of Headless Horsemen, and crafted myself about 20 vampire minions over the next week or so. Across a number of months, I upgraded them all to tier 5, some to tier 7, and even maxed one at tier 11 for the completion. Not long after I decided to just let the minions collect and to stop upgrading them, Derpy came into office. Derpy is another once every 6 months special mayor, and he brings a perk that doubles minion output. Given I'd just spent several months putting together the ultimate vampire minion setup, I looked into how I could maximize Derpy's perk. Enter Hypercatalysts. These multiply minion output by 6 times, which becomes 12 times during Derpy's reign in office. I also made sure to fuel my beacon for the 10% minion speed bonus that gives. Not long after this Derpy abuse, I had the Blood Donor artifact crafted and 10% mana regen buff acquired. Let's refocus for a second. I've dealt with EHP, I've dealt with mana regen, so now it's time to talk DPS. For magic damage, the stats that are taken into consideration are the weapon's base magic damage stat, the player's total mana, and the player's ability damage multiplier. I'm using a hype and don't have any other comparable weapon like the Midas Staff, so we can cross the weapon's base magic damage off the list. Let's talk total mana. I'll be honest, there wasn't a lot that I could do here either. I'd already maxed the mana that I could get out of my Hyperion when I first acquired it, and I set up the armor set basically the same. The only thing I was missing was the Big Brain and Smarty Pants books, but they would only give a tiny buff and were too slow or annoying to produce. The other big mana contributor is magical power and the reforge used. Over time, I had acquired more accessories and even thrown some recombs on some to boost my magical power as much as possible. At that time, I was using the Sighted Reforge, which I did consider swapping to Bazaar, which goes for between 250 to 300 million coins at the Dark Auction. Although Bazaar is better, I decided not to, because the opportunity cost was too great. See? I learned something valuable earlier. I'll explain the better financial decision here pretty soon. So with my decision to stick with Sighted, and not much else to improve mana-wise, I turned my attention to ability damage. The easiest way to buff this was to swap my beacon stat to ability damage. This sacrifices 5 magic find that I had it on before, but if it helps me do bosses faster, that kind of balances out in the end. The final change regarding DPS that I made caused its own set of problems. Despite how long this video has been going, you might recall that at the very beginning I said, right-click mage can be done in Hypermaxed Aurora, a Hyperion, and a Sheep or, again, 1 build bank G-Drag. I had a G-Drag, but no bank. So if I wanted to improve DPS, I needed to use my Sheep pet, which has a bonus 20% ability damage as one of its perks. It also helps that I can save 20% mana on ability usage with its Mana Saver perk. This led me to the unfortunate paradox where I couldn't damage fast enough without the Sheep pet, but I couldn't survive long enough without the Enderman pet. If only there was some way to get both perks at the same time. Lucky for me, there is. Well, kind of. I must apologize to those who jumped on YouTube to escape the pain and suffering of school, because we're talking opportunity cost again. Remember when I considered purchasing the Bazaar Reforge for 300 mil to slightly improve my DPS? There's another item that goes for slightly more coins, but it gives almost the same damage reduction as the Enderman pet. The Ender artifact cost me nearly 400 million coins, but it gives a 20% damage reduction from all end mobs, meaning that I could swap to my Sheep pet and still enjoy being hurt a little bit less. The RNG carry moment here was that I dropped the exceedingly rare Ender artifact upgrader at around 60k total E-Man Slayer XP, so I could upgrade the artifact to its relic form, allowing me to enjoy even more damage reduction at 25%. Also, I might be late to the party on this, but can we just talk about the fact that the Ender relic looks exactly the same as the Ender artifact? Is there a reason for this? If there is, let me know in the comments, but I don't get it. All this setup, and I hadn't even done a single eligible boss. Because until you hit 100,000 Slayer XP, being Ender Slayer level 7, the Judgment Core doesn't even enter the loot table. With a bit of practice, I knocked my boss time down from nearly 4 minutes using the Enderman pet to 2 minutes with bubblegum on my Sheep to double the longevity of my plasma flux, so I didn't have to replace it mid-boss fight. I sacrificed 100 mana from the textbook, but had enough DPS that I could afford to use the bubblegum for a more cruisy boss fight. After months and months of preparation, I could not only defeat the tier 4 boss, but I'd optimized my setup enough to take it down relatively efficiently. Now it was time to turn my attention to Magic Find. There's a lot that you can do here, but I had to keep in mind that I couldn't die to the boss while swapping gear, meaning that a Sorrow swap wasn't really an option for me. I settled on using my 100 million gold collection G-Drag while holding a Chimera 2 Daedalus axe that I'd crafted last Diana. This took my magic find from around 186 to 269. The only issue was that I needed to hold the Daedalus axe when the boss dies to get the bonus, meaning that it's pretty hard to kill.
Luckily, I streamed most of this grind and had a lot of viewers jump in to help out, so massive shout out to everyone who helped with the DPS or hits phase. You're all legends and I appreciate the support. The very last thing to consider is timing. I think it's well established by this point in the video that a lot of research and preparation has gotten me this far, consuming both an enormous amount of time and energy, so I think it's pretty reasonable to look at the most efficient time to go for the Judgment Core. Most of you watching will already know this, but for those that might not be aware, I was waiting for Mayor Aatrox. Unlike the other two mayors, Aatrox is one of the normal mayors on rotation. He has 3 perks, 25% more Slayer XP, 20 Magic Find bonus, and half-price quests. The main two that I needed were the XP buff and Pathfinder, but we scored with all 3 perks active, meaning that this was the perfect opportunity to push through as many bosses as possible. And that's exactly what I did. As I grinded away, I had a few cool moments. I brought my Enderman pet to level 100 and dropped 10 skins for it to choose from. I finished all 9 Hazmat Endermen for the Slender Power, and I accumulated a monstrous amount of Null Spheres and Twilight Arrow Poison. But you're not here for the average RNG. You probably want to hear about the insane drops that we acquired. Well, at around 350,000 total Slayer XP, I was on my 500th or 600th boss, and I dropped an Ender Slayer 7 book. Not only is this the rarest drop you can possibly obtain from the Voidgloom Seraph, but it is a 1 in 7,000 base drop chance. Let's put that in perspective. The Judgment Core, which we're actually going for, is 1 in 1,700, meaning that I should have dropped an average of 4 cores for every 1 Ender Slayer 7 book. The Ironman RNG is real. My chat at the time was telling me that this was a huge L moment, but honestly, I disagree. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, but here's why I'm not mad about it. Firstly, I had my meter on core from the beginning, so I still had all 350,000 Slayer XP saved up towards core. Secondly, even though Ender Slayer 7 isn't useful to me right now, when I build my left-click mage setup with Claymore in the near to medium future, this book will give me a nice DPS bonus in the M7 Phase 5 against Ender Dragons. Thirdly, the way that I see it, Ironman is a completionist game mode. What do I mean by that? Well, basically every task needs to be done at some point. Every item needs to be obtained. To specifically grind for this book would be an absolute nightmare, so to drop it almost by accident is just an awesome thing to happen. Now with that said, would I trade this book for 4 cores? Absolutely. At that point I'd have traded it for 2 cores if I could, but that obviously wasn't an option, so I pushed forward, looking for the Judgment Core. On day 5 of Aatrox, I started stressing a little. I logged on for stream and realized that I only had 11 hours before the mayor swapped over. Sure, I could keep doing bosses with a different mayor, but I'm about efficiency, and that just wouldn't be very efficient. It was about an hour into stream when the stars aligned. Streamer luck and Ironman RNG came together as one, and with help from Marvick and Stealth, I was Magic Find swapping to the Daedalus Axe when I saw it pop up a few blocks away. We had it. Months of research, planning, and gear progression had led me to this moment. I was so stoked, and I wish that I could show you my reaction at the time, but the recording bugged out, and so the audio is muted. At least we got the clip, I guess. And with that, I did a quick inventory of what resources I had or still needed to grind for. I mentioned at the very beginning of the video that the Terminator is a very expensive craft, and although the Judgment Core was the hardest of the resources to acquire, it was still a time-consuming process to produce the rest of the materials. I had made sure that I picked up all 10 stacks of Griffin Feathers the previous Diana, because that's a time-limited resource, and I'd used minions over the last 9 months to produce all the quartz and ender pearl required. At some point I finished off Lapis, but I think I went back and spent some of it on upgrading my Lapis minion to tier 12 for the Skyblock XP, so I needed to go back and get another 50 or so enchanted blocks. In the midst of this, I accidentally crafted an experience artifact.
No! Oh, bro, I'm actually dumb.
But I've already got one, so that kinda sucked. I got there in the end though. With Lapis out of the way, I turned my attention to Arachne for the soul string before lobby hopping the spider's den to obtain all the flint required. I did a test here, and my highest production was with full divans and a snail pet. This was kind of strange because the snail pet fortune buff affects non-ores, but mining fortune from divan armor affects ores only. I think that it has something to do with how the gravel is an ore but the flint isn't, so technically both mining fortune and non-ore fortune work during flint mining. The snail pet's fortune buff is superior to my quick claw bell, and I don't have a scather, so that was an interesting experiment. I already had the tarantula web from when I went to Spider Slayer 9, so that was free. I had all the obsidian too from a mining fiesta a while ago that I caught the last hour of. I did need to make a special trip for some more enchanted mithril because I had NPC sold it all because I was short on coins when purchasing the Ender artifact. This didn't take too long though, so I didn't mind it. The last two materials are Slayer related. I had accumulated so many null spheres that I could craft 2 Terminators with them, so that wasn't an issue. And it's a similar story with the slightly rarer null atoms. I needed 27 for the term, and I had over 50 by the time that I got core. With all the resources together, I got to crafting. Combining all these resources took a while, but certainly not even close to the amount of time that it took to originally acquire them. Once I'd finally crafted the Terminator, I immediately soulbound the item in the museum and got to work on making it actually decent. This meant Essence Stars, Master Stars, Hot Potato Books, Fumings, Enchants, and Ultimate Enchant, Reforging, and even changing up the Reforges on my dungeon equipment to maximize crit chance. This leads me to the only downside of the Terminator, because why would something so powerful ever get nerfed? And that is that it divides your crit chance by 4. This meant that I needed 400 crit chance to maximize my 1 hit and damage per second from the bow. To achieve this, or close enough, I applied the waxed Reforge to my dungeon equipment and changed my accessory power to Fortuitous. Outside of dungeons, I only had 84%, but inside master mode, I had 100%, so it wasn't that much of a nerf after all. This is my Terminator today. I'm aware that there are still a few things that I need to grind for, like a couple more Fumings and Soul Eater 5, but I'd really wanted to get this video out and show you all what I've been up to lately. I also wanted to shout out everyone who helped me throughout this grind, so you can see a list of them on screen now. Some of these legends stuck with me for over 100,000 XP of bosses, so I think it's fair to say that I couldn't have done this without them. And to everyone who tuned into the streams or is subs to the YouTube channel, thank you for your support. It really does mean the world to me, and every time I get a like or a comment on my videos, it gives me more motivation to keep producing content like this. I know that this video is significantly longer than what I would normally post, so thanks a ton for watching all the way to the end. You've already sat through 25 minutes of content, so I'm not going to hide the code word this time. Drop a comment with the code SOULFLOW to let me know that you watched the video through to the end. That's all for today. See you in the next one.